A billionaire hears a poor single mom beg, "Please save my daughter." What he does next will shock you. At about 2:30 in the morning, in a hospital where children fight for their lives, Sarah Williams was about to make a decision that would either save her daughter or destroy everything she'd ever believed about herself. The storm raging outside St. Mary's Children's Hospital seemed to mirror the chaos in her heart as she stared at her cell phone screen showing a bank balance of $47.83. $37,000. That's what it would cost to keep her 8-year-old daughter alive. $37,000 she didn't have, couldn't borrow, and would never see in her lifetime of cleaning floors for $11 an hour. The phone slipped from her trembling hands and clattered to the floor of the pediatric ICU waiting room, where emergency lighting cast ominous shadows and distant alarms mixed with the sound of thunder. Sarah Williams, 34 years old, exhausted beyond measure, sat alone in her soaked hospital cleaning uniform. Months of sleepless nights showed in every line of her face, every tremor in her hands. But she wasn't truly alone in that waiting room. 20 feet away, hidden in shadows, sat a man whose presence would change everything. A man with expensive shoes and a tailored coat, hunched forward like someone carrying an unbearable weight. His face remained obscured, but his hands gripped a phone displaying a contact list filled with names like Dr. Peterson, Johns Hopkins, and Senator Martinez. This man had secrets. This man had power. This man had his own devastating reason for being in a children's hospital at 2:30 in the morning. When lightning flashed, briefly illuminating both figures, Sarah noticed the stranger for the first time. What happened next defied every rule Sarah had lived by. What this desperate mother was about to do would either mark her as the bravest woman alive or the most foolish. She was about to approach a complete stranger. She was about to beg. She was about to break every barrier of race, class, and pride that society had built between them. Sarah stood up slowly, her decision made, and walked toward the stranger. Each step echoed in the silent waiting room like the countdown to either salvation or destruction. The stranger looked up as Sarah approached, and for one split second, his face emerged from the shadows. Ethan Blackwood, 52 years old, with haunted eyes that had seen too much loss, carrying secrets that could change everything. But Sarah didn't know who she was about to beg for help. She didn't know about the billions in his bank account. She didn't know about his own devastating loss. She didn't know that this encounter had been orchestrated by forces neither of them understood. Sarah stopped 3 feet away from Ethan, and their eyes met. In that moment, two worlds collided. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Please. I know this is crazy, but if you have any pull, any connections, anything, my daughter is dying in there, and I..." Her voice failed completely. Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable. What Sarah was about to discover would shake her faith in everything she thought she knew about luck, coincidence, and the true reason some prayers get answered. Ethan's phone screen lit up, showing a photo of a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. Sarah glimpsed it for just a moment before lightning struck again, plunging the waiting room into darkness. In the blackness, Ethan's voice was barely audible. "What's your daughter's name?" When the emergency lighting flickered back on, casting eerie shadows across both their faces, Sarah Williams was about to make a choice that would uncover secrets buried for 2 years, expose lies that powerful people had killed to protect, and reveal a connection so impossible that even she wouldn't believe it when she learned the truth. But someone was watching. Someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Someone who knew that Sarah Williams wasn't just a desperate mother and Ethan Blackwood wasn't just a generous billionaire. Outside the hospital, a figure in a car spoke into a radio through static. "Contact has been made. Proceed to phase 2. Sarah whispered, "Emma." "Her name is Emma Williams." Ethan's face changed completely, showing shock, recognition, and something that looked like fear. What Sarah didn't know was that saying her daughter's name had just activated a plan 2 years in the making. A plan that would save Emma's life, expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power, and reveal why a dying child's name was written in the private files of one of the world's most dangerous men. Ethan pulled out his phone, but his hands were shaking now. This wasn't a coincidence. This was never a coincidence. And what happens next will prove that some miracles come with a price that no one sees coming. Welcome back, my lovely and supportive family. I trust everyone is doing fine, and if you're not too fine, I pray this story brings you the needed goodness to make your day better and give you hope for tomorrow. If you're new, we are excited to have you on board. Please hit the subscribe button now to book your space for this beautiful and eventful journey. The scene continued in the hospital waiting room as Ethan stood, his phone still in his hand, looking at Sarah with an expression that was impossible to read. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while Sarah stepped back, suddenly embarrassed that she had poured her heart out to a complete stranger. But Ethan's voice cut through her embarrassment with quiet authority. "Your daughter. What's wrong with her?" Sarah looked up, surprised by the directness and the complete absence of judgment in his tone. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia," she replied, her voice breaking. "The doctors say there's an experimental treatment at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, but insurance calls it investigational. They won't pay." When Ethan asked about the hospital's capabilities, Sarah explained that Dr. Martinez was amazing, but Emma needed more than they could provide locally. Something shifted in Ethan's expression as he looked toward the pediatric ward, then back at Sarah. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Stay here." He walked away, phone already at his ear, leaving Sarah to stare after him with confusion and hope warring on her face. 6 months earlier, Sarah Williams had thought her biggest worry was making rent on time. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at dawn, and watching her neighbors' kids in the afternoons. Every penny went toward keeping their small apartment and putting food on the table for Emma. Her tiny but spotlessly clean home was covered with bills scattered on the kitchen table, some marked past due and red stamps, alongside photos of Emma everywhere, school pictures, dance recitals, birthday parties where Sarah had clearly made the cake herself. The refrigerator displayed Emma's artwork and honor roll certificates like trophies. Emma was everything Sarah wasn't supposed to be able to have. Born when Sarah was just 26, after Emma's father walked away the moment he heard the word pregnant, there had been no family support, no college degree, no safety net. Just Sarah's fierce determination that her daughter would have every opportunity Sarah never had. Emma was gifted, not just smart, but brilliant. Her teachers talked about scholarships, about programs for advanced students. Sarah worked those 3 jobs not just to survive, but to save every dollar for Emma's future, counting crumpled bills and coins into an old coffee tin labeled Emma's College in a child's handwriting. Then came the morning that changed everything. Emma couldn't get out of bed, saying she was tired. Sarah thought it was just a bug, maybe something going around school. But the tiredness didn't go away, followed by bruises that appeared overnight in places where Emma hadn't fallen or bumped into anything. Sarah's hands gently touched Emma's forehead as a mother's intuition screamed that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Martinez at St. Mary's delivered the diagnosis with gentle words and kind eyes, but the reality was brutal. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Childhood blood cancer. Treatable, she said, but aggressive. Emma would need chemotherapy, radiation, and if those failed. Sarah's face crumpled as she heard words no parent should ever hear, her hands gripping Emma's hospital bed rail. The treatment began immediately. Sarah quit her day jobs and picked up more night shifts so she could be with Emma during the day. The hospital became their second home. Emma's bright spirit never dimmed, even when her hair fell out, even when she was too weak to walk to the bathroom alone. For 4 months, they fought together. Sarah slept in that uncomfortable hospital chair, held Emma's hand through every treatment, sang to her through every bad night while Emma, bald but smiling, showed Sarah drawings she'd made of both of them with angel wings. The doctors were hopeful. Emma was responding well. The cancer was retreating as Sarah fed Emma ice chips and they watched cartoons together on a small tablet, Emma's laughter filling the sterile room. Then the relapse came like a punch to the gut. The cancer was back, more aggressive than before. The standard treatments weren't working anymore. Dr. Martinez, a compassionate woman in her 40s, mentioned Philadelphia, mentioned experimental treatments that were showing promising results in children exactly like Emma. $37,000. That's what hope cost. $37,000 that might as well have been $37 million for a woman who made $11 an hour and hadn't worked a full week in months. 2 years earlier, across town, Ethan Blackwood had built his fortune the hard way, starting with nothing, working 18-hour days, making the kind of calculated risks that either destroy you or make you untouchable. By 45, he was worth more than some small countries, with tech companies, real estate, and investments spanning from clean energy to space exploration. Newspaper headlines and magazine covers featured him regularly. Tech Mobile's latest acquisition, Blackwood Industries, reaches new heights, the Midas touch of modern business. But success had cost him his first marriage, most of his friendships, and nearly 2 decades of 18-hour days. The only thing that kept him human was Lily. Home videos played on his laptop screen showed a little girl with blonde curls and her father's determined chin, maybe 6 years old, riding on Ethan's shoulders through their enormous house, both of them laughing. Lily was his second chance at everything, born when Ethan was 44 to his second wife, Caroline. She was the miracle that made him realize money meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Ethan cut his work schedule in half and started coaching Lily's soccer team. He never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. More home videos showed Ethan teaching Lily to ride a bike in their circular driveway, both covered in flour after attempting to bake cookies, Lily wearing a tiny hard hat as Ethan showed her around a construction site. Caroline used to joke that Ethan spoiled Lily rotten, but it wasn't true. He gave her experiences, not things. They traveled together, learned together, built tree forts and rocket ships from cardboard boxes. Lily was brilliant like her father, but kind in a way that Ethan was still learning to be. A family portrait showed Ethan, Caroline, and Lily at a school fundraiser, all three beaming, Ethan's arm around his wife, Lily on his shoulders making bunny ears behind his head. The headaches started when Lily was 7, just occasional complaints, nothing that seemed serious. Kids get headaches. Caroline took her to their pediatrician, who suggested less screen time, more sleep, maybe new glasses. But a mother knows. Caroline pushed for more tests, despite the doctor's reassurances. An MRI revealed what every parent fears most, a brain tumor. Inoperable. Aggressive. The kind of diagnosis that gives you months, not years. Ethan did what he did best, he threw money at the problem. The best doctors. Experimental treatments. Clinical trials in Switzerland, Germany, anywhere that offered even a shred of hope. For 8 months, they fought with everything they had. Hospital corridors in upscale private facilities became their second home as Ethan carried Lily, who had gotten thinner and paler, but still smiled up at her father. Lily faced every treatment with courage that humbled grown men. She worried more about her parents than herself, drew pictures for her nurses, made friends with other sick children and tried to cheer them up when they were scared. A child's drawing taped to her hospital room wall showed stick figures of a family holding hands under a rainbow, with "I love you, Daddy" written in crayon. She died on a Tuesday morning in spring, with her parents holding her hands and sunlight streaming through the hospital window. Her last words were, "Don't be sad, Daddy. I'll see you later." Ethan stood alone in his massive house afterward, in what had clearly been Lily's bedroom, pink walls, stuffed animals, a bed that would never be slept in again. Caroline couldn't handle the grief. She left 6 months later, saying the house, the memories, even Ethan himself reminded her too much of what they'd lost. Ethan didn't fight the divorce. He understood. He reminded himself of Lily too. For 2 years, Ethan existed rather than lived. He went through the motions of running his companies, attending board meetings, making deals. But the man who had once found joy in every challenge now found meaning in nothing. The money that had once represented success now felt like a burden. What good was infinite wealth if it couldn't save the one person who mattered most? Back in the present, Ethan walked back towards Sarah in the hospital waiting room, his phone calls completed. It was now 3:15 a.m., and Sarah had fallen asleep in the uncomfortable chair, exhaustion finally overtaking anxiety. As he looked at this stranger sleeping in the same kind of chair where he'd spent the worst months of his life, something awakened in him that had been dormant for 2 years. Here was a parent fighting the same fight he'd fought. Here was a little girl who needed a miracle. Ethan gently touched Sarah's shoulder, and she startled awake, immediately alert in the way that parents of sick children learn to be. "I've made some calls," he said softly. When Sarah asked what that meant, he explained, "Dr. Sarah Chen at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She's one of the leading pediatric oncologists in the country, specializing in exactly what Emma has. She'll see Emma tomorrow." When Sarah protested that she couldn't afford it, Ethan held up his hand. "It's handled. Transportation, treatment, everything. You just focus on Emma." Sarah stared at him, tears streaming down her face, asking why he would do this for strangers. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, looking toward the pediatric ward. "Because every child deserves a chance," he said simply. As he started to walk away, he turned back. "Sarah? Your daughter is lucky to have you." Sarah watched him leave, still not understanding who he was or why he was helping, but for the first time in months, allowing herself to hope. At 4 a.m., she called in every favor she had. Her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez agreed to cover her cleaning shifts. Her sister in Baltimore wired the $200 she had saved for Christmas presents, money for gas and food for the drive to Philadelphia. By 6 a.m., Emma was being transferred to a medical transport vehicle that Sarah couldn't possibly afford but had somehow been arranged and paid for. Emma was weak but excited. She'd never been to Philadelphia, never been in an ambulance that wasn't scary. As they pulled away from St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah looked back at the building that had been their world for the past 6 months. Somewhere in that building, or perhaps already gone, was the stranger who had just changed their lives. She didn't even know his last name. What Sarah didn't know was that Ethan was watching from a window on the 4th floor, his own reflection ghost-like in the glass. In his hand was his phone, with Dr. Chen's number still on the screen and a text message that read, "Whatever it takes. Money is no object. Save this child." For the first time in 2 years, Ethan Blackwood had a purpose beyond his own grief. He had no idea that saving Emma Williams would end up saving himself. Sometimes the most broken hearts recognize each other across a crowded room. If this story is touching you the way it's touching me, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because kindness like this reminds us that we're all connected, no matter where we are in the world. Dawn broke over the Philadelphia skyline as the medical transport pulled up to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, one of the most prestigious children's hospitals in the country. The glass and steel building reached toward the sky, filled with the kind of medical miracles that happen when brilliant minds have unlimited resources. For Emma Williams, it represented something she'd never had before, a real chance. Sarah helped Emma out of the medical transport, and though Emma was weak, she looked up at the massive building with wide, curious eyes. She asked if this was where they were going to make her better, and Sarah forced confidence into her voice. "This is where we're gonna find out, baby girl." What Sarah didn't know was that 3 floors above them, Dr. Sarah Chen was already reviewing Emma's medical files that had been marked priority and accompanied by a donation of $5 million to the hospital's Pediatric Oncology Research Fund. While Emma was being admitted to her new hospital room, Ethan Blackwood sat behind his massive desk in his corner office on the 45th floor, overlooking the city. But his attention wasn't on the stack of contracts in front of him. Instead, he stared at his computer screen, doing what he did best, gathering information. But this wasn't about a corporate merger or market analysis. This was about understanding the woman whose desperation had awakened something in him he thought was dead forever. The preliminary report from his investigator painted a picture that both impressed and humbled him. Sarah Williams, 26 when Emma was born, had been working since she was 14, under-the-table jobs to help her grandmother pay rent after her parents died in a car accident. No criminal record. No debt beyond medical bills. No government assistance despite qualifying for multiple programs. Sarah's pride wouldn't let her accept what she called handouts when she could work for every dollar. 3 jobs, sometimes 4 during holiday seasons, all to provide for Emma and save for her future. Ethan picked up his phone and called his investigator. "I need you to look into something else. I want to know about Emma's father. Full background. And be thorough." He hung up and turned his chair to face the window, looking out at the city where thousands of people were starting their daily struggles. What Ethan was beginning to understand was that Sarah Williams represented something he'd lost touch with during his climb to the top: pure, uncomplicated love that asks for nothing but gives everything. The kind of love he'd felt for Lily, but had forgotten existed in the world after losing her. In Philadelphia, Emma was settled in a state-of-the-art pediatric room, clearly expensive, with every comfort a sick child could need. She sat in bed clutching her worn teddy bear named Mr. Buttons while Sarah read nearby. Dr. Sarah Chan entered with the kind of confident compassion that comes from saving children's lives for 20 years. She saw a bright-eyed 8-year-old who was clearly scared but trying to be brave for her mother. Dr. Chan sat on the edge of Emma's bed, explaining that she'd been looking at Emma's medical pictures and scans from her other hospital, and she thought they could help. But she needed Emma to be her partner in this fight. When Emma asked if it would hurt, Dr. Chen was honest: "Some of it will. But we have very good medicine to help with pain, and your job is just to be as brave as you already are." Emma nodded solemnly and looked at her mother, asking if she was going to stay. Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. "Every single minute, baby girl. I'm not going anywhere." What Sarah didn't know was that the room she was sitting in cost $3,000 a day. She didn't know that Dr. Chen had cleared her schedule to focus primarily on Emma's case. She didn't know that the experimental treatment had been fast-tracked through approval processes that normally took months. All Sarah knew was that for the first time since Emma's diagnosis, she wasn't being told what they couldn't do. Instead, Dr. Chen outlined an aggressive treatment plan that sounded like science fiction: targeted therapy, immunotherapy, treatments that attacked Emma's specific cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue alone. 2 days into Emma's treatment, Sarah began asking questions. The hospital told her everything was covered by a charitable foundation, but wouldn't say which one. The social worker who helped arrange her temporary housing near the hospital was vague about who was paying for it. In the hospital cafeteria, a tired-looking social worker with kind eyes told Sarah that sometimes people prefer to help without recognition, and that there are more good people in this world than you might think. When Sarah insisted she needed to know who to thank and who to pay back someday, the social worker smiled gently and suggested that maybe someday Sarah would have the chance to help someone else the way she'd been helped. But Sarah's pride wouldn't let her accept help without understanding it. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, she began making phone calls from the small apartment provided for her. She called St. Mary's Hospital, trying to find out who the man in the waiting room had been. Speaking quietly on the phone while Emma slept in the next room, she described him to a nurse. He was there around 2:30 a.m., Tuesday morning. White man, maybe early 50s, expensive clothes but not flashy. He made some phone calls and then everything changed for us. The nurse's voice through the phone was gentle. "Honey, we get a lot of people through here. But if someone helped your baby, maybe the how matters less than the why." While Sarah searched for her mysterious benefactor, Ethan was learning everything there was to know about the Williams family from his home office in his mansion, late at night. The room was dark except for his computer screen and a single desk lamp, with empty coffee cups and takeout containers suggesting he'd been there for hours. What he discovered made him respect Sarah even more, and made him angrier than he'd been in years. Emma's father was Derek Williams, a 28-year-old graduate student when he met Sarah. He'd promised her marriage, promised her a future, promised he wanted to be a father. The moment Sarah told him she was pregnant, Derek disappeared. No forwarding address, no explanation, no support, financial or emotional. Ethan picked up his phone again. "I want you to find Derek Williams." Last known address was Baltimore, but he could be anywhere by now. "And when you find him, I want to know everything about his current life." Everything. But it wasn't anger driving Ethan's investigation, it was admiration. Sarah had faced single parenthood at 26 with the same determination she now brought to fighting for Emma's life. She'd never complained, never sought pity, never blamed anyone else for her circumstances. The more Ethan learned about Sarah, the more he understood why Emma was such a remarkable child. Sarah had taught her daughter that challenges were temporary, that hard work pays off, that integrity matters more than comfort. Emma's teachers described her as exceptionally bright but also exceptionally kind, helping struggling classmates, sharing her lunch with kids who forgot theirs, always trying to make others feel included. Reading about Emma was like reading about Lily in many ways. Both girls faced their medical challenges with courage that humbled adults. Both worried more about their parents than themselves. Both had that rare quality of making everyone around them want to be better people. On Emma's 4th day of treatment, small miracles began happening around Philadelphia. Sarah's temporary apartment was upgraded to a larger space closer to the hospital. The management claimed there had been a clerical error and the better apartment was actually the same price. Sarah unpacked in the much nicer space, confused but grateful. The hospital cafeteria started providing free meals for families of long-term patients, a new program, they said, funded by an anonymous donor. Sarah's job back home somehow held her position open indefinitely, with her supervisor claiming the company had implemented a new family medical leave policy. Each act of kindness was small enough to be believable, but together they removed every barrier that might have prevented Sarah from focusing completely on Emma's recovery. It was as if an invisible guardian angel was smoothing their path. When Dr. Chen updated Sarah on Emma's progress, showing charts that indicated the treatment was working, Sarah began crying, tears of relief, hope, and overwhelming gratitude. "Sarah, I have to tell you, Emma is responding better than we hoped," Dr. Chen said. "Her latest blood work shows significant improvement. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is very encouraging." Sarah thanked Dr. Chen through her tears, saying she knew someone was helping them even though she didn't understand why. Dr. Chen sat down beside Sarah and reminded her that sometimes the why doesn't matter as much as the what, and what mattered was that Emma was getting better. That night, Ethan stood in Lily's former bedroom for the first time since her death, which had been preserved exactly as she left it. He sat on her small bed and looked through her drawings and school projects. One drawing in particular caught his attention, a picture of their family, but with extra figures Lily had labeled "the sad people we're gonna help someday." The drawing showed stick figures holding hands in a long chain, with a rainbow overhead and the words "helping makes us happy" in crayon. Lily had always been drawn to helping others. Even at 6 years old, she'd insisted on donating her birthday money to animal shelters, giving her Halloween candy to kids who didn't get to trick-or-treat, making cards for elderly people in nursing homes. She'd had plans, she told Ethan, to help all the sad people when she grew up. Ethan picked up his phone and called Dr. Chen directly. "Dr. Chen, this is a friend of the Williams family. How is Emma doing?" When Dr. Chen professionally protested that she couldn't discuss patient information, Ethan explained, "Doctor, I'm the one who's been covering Emma's treatment costs. I just need to know, is she going to be okay? After a long pause, Dr. Chen said the treatment was working better than expected, and if Emma continued responding this well, her prognosis was very good. When she asked why he was helping this family, Ethan looked at Lily's drawing and replied, "Because someone I loved very much would have wanted me to." As Emma's health improved, Sarah's curiosity about their mysterious benefactor grew stronger. She tried to research charitable foundations, tried to get more information from hospital administration, but every inquiry led to the same polite dead ends. In Emma's hospital room late one evening, with Emma sleeping peacefully and her color already better than it had been in months, Sarah stepped out into the hallway and approached a nurse at the station. She asked about the person who was helping her daughter, and the nurse smiled knowingly. "Honey, in 20 years of working here, I've seen a lot of generous people. But I've never seen someone go to these lengths to help a child they've never met. Whoever your angel is, they've got a story of their own." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the man in the hospital waiting room, about his haunted eyes when he'd said yes. Had when she asked if he had children, about the way his voice had changed when he'd asked Emma's name. Something about that encounter felt like more than coincidence. The timing, the immediate response, the way he'd seemed to understand her desperation so completely. Sarah Williams was a smart woman, and smart women notice patterns. On Emma's 8th day of treatment, Sarah was walking through the hospital lobby when she saw him. Just for a moment, a familiar figure disappearing around a corner, the same expensive coat, the same purposeful stride. Sarah quickened her pace, following the figure, but by the time she reached the corner, he was gone. But she had seen enough to confirm what she'd begun to suspect. Their mysterious benefactor wasn't some distant philanthropist writing checks from afar. He was here, in Philadelphia, watching over them. Sarah asked the information desk about visitors, trying to be casual but clearly investigating. The volunteer mentioned that she might mean Mr. Blackwood, who had been there several times that week, always asking about the children's wing. Sarah's eyes widened. She had a name now. Ethan Blackwood. Sarah repeated the name to herself as she rode the elevator back to Emma's floor. She'd heard that name before, she was sure of it, but couldn't place where. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah did what any mother would do in 2024. She Googled Ethan Blackwood. What she found made her hands shake. Search results showed news articles, photos of Ethan at corporate events, and one particularly poignant article with the headline, "Tech Billionaire's Daughter Dies at 8 After Battle with Brain Cancer." Ethan Blackwood wasn't just wealthy, he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. But more than that, he was a father who had lost his 8-year-old daughter to cancer just 2 years earlier. A father who understood exactly what Sarah was going through because he'd lived it himself. Sarah stared at a photo of Ethan with Lily, both of them laughing, both clearly adoring each other, and whispered to herself, "Oh my God. That's why. That's why he's doing this." As Sarah read article after article about Ethan's life, about his success and his devastating loss, she began to understand the depth of what he was doing for them. This wasn't charity from a distance. This was a grieving father trying to save another man's child because he couldn't save his own. The articles painted a picture of a man who'd had everything and lost the only thing that truly mattered. After Lily's death, Ethan had become reclusive, still running his companies but no longer engaging with the world the way he once had. Sarah understood now why Ethan was helping them, but understanding made it almost harder to accept. This wasn't just about Emma getting better, it was about a broken man trying to heal himself by healing others. She wanted to call him, to thank him properly, to let him know that she understood what this meant to him. But something held her back. Maybe it was the realization that he was helping them anonymously for a reason. Maybe he needed to do this quietly, in his own way, in his own time. Instead, Sarah began writing in a small notebook, a letter to the man who was saving her daughter's life while trying to heal his own broken heart. A letter she wasn't sure she'd ever be brave enough to give him, but that she needed to write anyway. There's something powerful about recognizing your own pain in a stranger's eyes. Sometimes guardian angels don't have wings, they have broken hearts trying to heal. What do you think drives people to help strangers in their darkest moments? Share your thoughts below, and let us know where in the world you're watching from, because stories like this remind us we're all connected. 2 weeks of cutting-edge treatment had transformed Emma Williams from a frail, dying child into something that looked remarkably like hope itself. Her latest blood work showed cancer markers dropping so rapidly that Dr. Chen called it exceptional, the kind of response that medical journals would want to write about. Emma sat up in her hospital bed, now filled with flowers, cards from well-wishers, and her artwork covering every available surface. Color had returned to her cheeks, and energy filled her movements as she taught her mother how to play a card game, both of them laughing at Sarah's confusion over the rules. Emma giggled as she corrected her mother, "Mama, you're supposed to put the red 7 on the black 8, not the other way around." Sarah laughed despite herself, saying Emma was too smart for her own good and asking where she'd learned to be such a good teacher. Emma's response was simple, "From you, Mama. You taught me that when someone doesn't understand something, you help them figure it out. You don't make them feel dumb." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, happy tears this time. But while Emma flourished under the best medical care money could buy, Sarah struggled with a growing sense of debt that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the human heart. What had started as helping one desperately sick child had evolved into something much larger for Ethan Blackwood. The man who hadn't felt genuinely useful in 2 years was now orchestrating a symphony of assistance that touched every aspect of the Williams family's life. In his office, coordinating what had become a comprehensive support operation, Ethan was on a conference call with his legal team. "I want Sarah Williams' student loan debt cleared. All of it. And I want it done through the hospital's existing financial assistance program so it looks official." When his legal advisor mentioned that this was another $43,000 on top of everything else they'd spent, Ethan cut him off. "Do I need to repeat myself?" His assistant Janet, a sharp woman who'd worked with him for over a decade, warned him that Sarah was going to figure out it was him eventually, smart woman like that, asking the right questions. Ethan stared out his window and acknowledged he knew, but said she needed to focus on Emma right now, not on thanking him or feeling guilty about accepting help. What Janet didn't say, but both she and Ethan understood, was that he wasn't ready for Sarah to know either. Helping anonymously allowed him to channel his grief into something positive without having to explain himself, without having to relive Lily's story over and over. Armed with Ethan's name and a mother's determination, Sarah began piecing together a puzzle that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She learned that Ethan visited the hospital almost daily, always asking about pediatric patients, always checking on children whose families couldn't afford the best care. In the hospital's family lounge, talking quietly with other parents whose children were receiving treatment, Sarah asked if anyone else had mysterious help with their treatment costs. Another mother confirmed that her son's physical therapy was supposed to cost extra, but last week they told her it was covered by some new program, and they got moved to a better room when one became available. Sarah began to understand that Emma wasn't Ethan's only beneficiary. He was quietly helping multiple families, creating programs and scholarships and grants that helped children get the care they needed. Sarah made notes in her small notebook, building a picture of the scope of Ethan's generosity. Understanding the breadth of what he was doing only made her more desperate to thank him properly. This wasn't a billionaire throwing around pocket change, this was a grieving father turning his pain into purpose. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Sarah finally saw Ethan clearly. He was sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, staring at his phone, looking exactly as lost and lonely as he had that night in the waiting room 2 weeks earlier. Sarah approached slowly, coffee cup in hand, heart pounding. For a moment, she thought about walking over, introducing herself properly, thanking him for saving Emma's life. But as she got closer, she noticed what was on his phone screen, a photo of a little girl with blonde curls and a gap-toothed smile, obviously his daughter, obviously the child he'd lost. The raw pain on his face stopped Sarah in her tracks. This wasn't a man ready to be thanked or celebrated. This was a man trying to heal himself by healing others, and he needed to do it his own way, in his own time. Sarah quietly retreated, leaving Ethan to his memories. She understood something profound in that moment. Ethan wasn't helping them despite his grief, he was helping them because of it. Emma's recovery was somehow connected to his own healing, and interrupting that process might hurt both of them. What Sarah didn't know was that helping Emma had awakened something in Ethan that had been dormant since Lily's death. For the first time in 2 years, he was thinking beyond his own loss, planning beyond his own pain. In his mansion's home office late at night, surrounded by legal documents, architectural plans, and organizational charts, Ethan was on the phone with his lawyer. "I want to establish the Lily Grace Foundation officially. Pediatric Cancer Research and Treatment Assistance. I want it operational within the month." His lawyer expressed concern about public attention, interviews, and questions Ethan might not want to answer. But Ethan's response was firm, "Then I'll answer them. It's time, David. It's time to turn what happened to Lily into something that can help other children." He looked at a framed photo of Lily on his desk, the same photo from his phone, and spoke softly to her image. "I think you'd like Emma, sweetheart. She's brave like you were. Fights like you did. I wish you could have met her." The foundation would be Ethan's way of ensuring that no parent would ever have to beg for help the way Sarah had that night. No child would die because their family couldn't afford treatment. It would be Lily's legacy and Emma's gift to the world. By her 3rd week of treatment, Emma Williams had become something of a celebrity on the pediatric oncology floor. Not because of her mysterious benefactor, though rumors swirled, but because of her infectious optimism and determination to help other sick children. Emma was often seen in a wheelchair, visiting other patients' rooms, carrying handmade cards and small gifts. She told a younger boy in another room, "I made you this picture of Superman fighting the bad cells. That's what the medicine does, it's like having superheroes in your blood." When the boy asked if she was going to get better, Emma replied with 8-year-old certainty, "Yep. And so are you. The doctors here are really, really good at making kids better." Dr. Chen had never seen a patient adapt to treatment so well, not just physically but emotionally. Emma seemed to understand that her recovery could give hope to other families, and she took that responsibility seriously. When Dr. Chen updated Sarah on Emma's progress, both women were beaming. "Sarah, I have incredible news. Emma's latest scans show no detectable cancer cells. None. If this continues for another few weeks, we can start talking about remission." Sarah broke down crying, tears of joy, relief, and overwhelming gratitude, saying there was someone she needed to thank, someone who made all this possible, but she didn't even know how to find him. Dr. Chen knowingly suggested that sometimes the best way to thank someone is to pay their kindness forward. While Emma celebrated her improving health, Ethan's investigator had finally tracked down Derek Williams, Emma's father. What they found infuriated Ethan in a way that even corporate betrayals never had. Derek Williams was now 36, married to a woman he'd met 6 months after abandoning Sarah, living in a comfortable suburb of Atlanta with twin boys aged 6. He worked as a marketing director, drove a BMW, and had never once tried to contact Emma or provide any support. Ethan picked up his phone. "I want you to visit Derek Williams. I want him to know that Emma exists, that she's been fighting for her life, and that he's had a daughter he's never acknowledged for 8 years. When asked what to tell him, Ethan's voice was cold. "I want you to tell him that his daughter almost died because he was too much of a coward to be a father. And I want you to tell him that if he ever tries to contact them now that Emma's getting better, he'll deal with me personally." It wasn't about the money. Ethan had more than enough to support Emma forever. It was about justice, about making Derek Williams face what his cowardice had cost an innocent child. That night, Sarah Williams did something she hadn't done since Emma's diagnosis. She allowed herself to feel angry. Not at God, not at the disease, not at the circumstances of her life. She felt angry at Derek Williams, the man who should have been there through all of this. She'd kept Derek's number all these years, not because she hoped he'd come back, but because someday Emma might want to know her father. Now, with Emma getting better and the future looking bright, Sarah realized something important. Emma didn't need Derek Williams. She had something better. She had people who chose to love her. A mother who worked 3 jobs to provide for her dreams. A mysterious guardian who moved heaven and earth to save her life. Doctors and nurses who celebrated her recovery. A community of people who had chosen to care about her. Sarah deleted Derek's contact information from her phone and picked up the letter she'd been writing to Ethan. Sarah read through the letter one more time. Pages of gratitude, of understanding, of recognition for what his help had meant to them. But she realized something as she read it. This letter wasn't for Ethan. It was for her. She needed to write it, but he didn't need to read it. Not yet. Sarah folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Instead, Sarah opened her laptop and began researching something else, nursing school programs. If Emma was going to be okay, if they were going to have a future they'd never dared dream of, Sarah wanted to be able to help other families the way they'd been helped. It was Emma's 22nd day of treatment when Sarah finally witnessed Ethan in action. She was walking to Emma's room early one morning when she saw him in deep conversation with Dr. Chen, clearly discussing not just Emma but several other patients. Sarah hung back, listening from around a corner as Dr. Chen mentioned that the Martinez family couldn't afford the experimental treatment, but their daughter was a perfect candidate. Ethan's response was immediate, then make it happen. Whatever it costs. And the Morrison boy who needs the surgery? Dr. Chen confirmed it was already scheduled, then added, Ethan, what you're doing for these families. Lily would be so proud. Ethan's voice caught slightly as he replied, she always wanted to help sad people. I'm trying to finish what she started. Sarah covered her mouth to stifle a sob, finally understanding the full depth of what Ethan was doing. In that moment, she realized that Ethan wasn't just helping Emma, he was helping every child he could, turning his grief into a force for healing that touched dozens of families. She also realized something else. Ethan Blackwood didn't need her thanks. He needed something much more important. He needed to know that what he was doing mattered, that Lily's memory was being honored, that his pain had found purpose. As Sarah sat beside Emma's bed that morning, watching her daughter sleep peacefully, she formed a plan of her own. She couldn't thank Ethan directly, he wasn't ready for that. But she could do something else. She could make sure his kindness multiplied, that Emma's recovery became a catalyst for helping even more children. Sarah began writing a different kind of letter. Not to Ethan, but to her local newspaper back home. She would tell Emma's story, but she wouldn't mention Ethan by name. Instead, she would challenge their community to step up, to help other families facing what they had faced. As she typed, occasionally looking over at Emma with determination and love, she wrote, My daughter Emma is alive today because someone chose to help when they didn't have to. I may never know who this person is, but I know what they've taught me, that we all have the power to be someone's miracle. It wasn't much, but it was what Sarah could do. She could take Ethan's anonymous kindness and turn it into a call for others to act with the same generosity. That evening, in a hospital parking garage, Ethan was walking to his car when his phone rang. His investigator had better than good news about Emma. Dr. Chen said if Emma continued improving at this rate, she could be discharged the following week. Full remission. Ethan stopped walking, leaning against his car for support as his voice broke. She's really going to be okay? When confirmed that she was going to be okay, that he had saved her, Ethan hung up, and for the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to cry tears of joy instead of grief. Standing alone in that parking garage, Ethan Blackwood felt something he thought he'd lost forever when Lily died. He felt useful. He felt like a father again. Not Emma's father, but someone who had used his resources and his pain to ensure that another little girl would grow up, would have the future that Lily couldn't have. Looking up at the hospital, with lights glowing in windows where children were fighting for their lives, Ethan understood that tomorrow, Emma Williams would wake up cancer-free. Tomorrow, Sarah Williams would begin planning a future she'd thought was impossible. And tomorrow, he would take the next step in turning his grief into something beautiful. But tonight, he had one more thing to do. Tonight, he was finally ready to stop being Emma's anonymous guardian angel. Tonight, he was ready to meet the little girl who had saved him as much as he'd saved her. Sometimes guardian angels don't have wings, they have broken hearts trying to heal. Emma's recovery isn't just about medicine, it's about what happens when someone's pain transforms into someone else's miracle. If stories like this remind you that there's still good in the world, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because we all need to be reminded that healing is possible, even in the darkest moments. Emma Williams had been cancer-free for 3 days. 3 days of celebration, of hope, of planning a future that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Tonight would be her last night in the hospital that had become her second home. In her room, Emma sat up in bed looking healthier than she had in months, drawing a picture while Sarah read nearby. Emma held up her drawing, a picture of stick figures holding hands around a hospital building, with hearts floating above them. She explained it was for all the people who helped her get better, pointing to each figure. That's Dr. Chen, and that's you, and that's the nurses, and that's the angel man. Sarah was surprised and asked what she meant by angel man. Emma explained matter-of-factly, the sad man who comes to visit sometimes. I've seen him in the hallway. He looks at all the sick kids with really sad eyes, but also kind eyes. Like he wants to help but doesn't know how to say it. Sarah's heart stopped. Emma had seen Ethan. When Sarah asked when she had seen this man, Emma replied that it was lots of times. He talked to Dr. Chen about kids who needed help, and yesterday, when Sarah was getting coffee, he came and looked through her door. When Emma waved, he smiled, but it was a sad smile. Sarah realized that while she'd been protecting Ethan's anonymity, Emma had been observing everything with the clarity that only children possess. Her daughter had recognized kindness even when it came wrapped in grief. Down the hall, Ethan Blackwood stood frozen outside room 314, holding a small wrapped gift, a stuffed elephant that had been Lily's favorite. For the first time in 3 weeks of watching from a distance, he was ready to meet the little girl whose recovery had given his life meaning again. The elephant's name was Peanut, and it had been Lily's constant companion through her own medical treatments. When Lily died, Ethan had kept Peanut in her bedroom, unable to touch it, unable to give it away. Tonight felt different. Tonight, Peanut needed to comfort another little girl. Ethan took a deep breath and knocked gently on the doorframe, saying he hoped he wasn't interrupting. Sarah looked up from her book and froze. After 3 weeks of wondering, searching, and protecting his anonymity, her daughter's guardian angel was standing in the doorway. Sarah whispered, "Mr. Blackwood." Ethan's eyes widened, she knew who he was. Emma brightly announced, "You're the angel man. I drew you in my picture." The three of them now stood together in Emma's hospital room, the air thick with emotion and unspoken gratitude. When Ethan asked uncertainly if Sarah knew who he was, she replied with growing strength in her voice, "I know you're the man who saved my daughter's life." Ethan uncomfortably deflected, saying he just made some phone calls, but Sarah's voice grew stronger as she listed everything he had done: paid for experimental treatment that insurance wouldn't cover, arranged for the best doctors in the country to focus on Emma, covered their housing and food so she could focus on being Emma's mother instead of worrying about money. Emma watched this exchange with the intuitive understanding of a child who'd been through too much, then asked if he was the one who helped them, explaining that her mama had been crying happy tears about someone who helped them but couldn't find them to say thank you. Ethan knelt beside Emma's bed and introduced himself, then presented the stuffed elephant. This is Peanut. He's very good at helping kids feel brave. Emma took Peanut gently, immediately hugging him close, and observed that he felt like he'd been loved a lot. Ethan's voice caught as he replied, he was. By a little girl who was very brave, just like you. Sarah struggled with overwhelming emotion as she watched Ethan with Emma, trying to express her gratitude for what he'd done. When she said they didn't have insurance that would cover Emma's treatment and she was working 3 jobs but still couldn't afford it, Ethan asked her to call him Ethan and said she didn't need to thank him. Sarah insisted she did need to know why a stranger would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to save a child he'd never met. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma arrange Peanut next to her other stuffed animals, then answered simply, because I couldn't save my own daughter. The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the hospital. For the first time since Lily's death, Ethan Blackwood told her story to strangers. But Emma and Sarah didn't feel like strangers anymore, they felt like family. Ethan explained that his daughter's name was Lily Grace Blackwood, and she was 8 years old when she died, just like Emma was now. She had brain cancer, and they tried everything, every treatment, every specialist, every experimental therapy they could find. When Emma softly asked if she had to stay in the hospital a lot, Ethan confirmed she did, 4 months, and that she was brave just like Emma had been brave. She worried more about her mom and dad being sad than she worried about being sick. When Sarah quietly asked what happened then, Ethan explained that when Lily died, he thought maybe God was punishing him for something, for working too much, for caring too much about money, for not appreciating what he had when he had it. But then he met Sarah that night in the waiting room. She was begging for help to save Emma, and he saw something in her eyes that he recognized, the same desperate love he'd felt for Lily, the same willingness to do anything, give anything, be anything, if it meant her child might live. Emma reached out and took Ethan's hand, saying simply, I'm sorry your little girl got too sick to stay. Ethan's composure finally broke. Tears rolled down his face as this 8-year-old offered him comfort, and he replied with a voice thick with emotion, Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know. The 3 of them drew closer now, the formal barriers breaking down into genuine human connection. Sarah told Ethan that what he'd done wasn't just about the money, he'd given Emma a chance, but he'd also given Sarah something she'd lost, hope, faith that there are still good people in the world, faith that she and Emma weren't alone in this fight. What Sarah didn't say, but what Ethan could see in her eyes, was that she understood his pain. She recognized that helping Emma had been as much about his healing as it had been about her daughter's medical treatment. Ethan needed Sarah to know that helping Emma was the first time since Lily died that he'd felt like his life had purpose, like maybe Lily's death wasn't meaningless if it could help him recognize another child who needed saving. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes and replied that he didn't just save Emma, he saved her too. She was drowning in debt, in fear, in the certainty that she was going to lose the most important thing in her life because she couldn't afford to save her. Emma, looking between the 2 adults, asked with simple wisdom, so you both helped each other? Both Ethan and Sarah looked at Emma, struck by her insight, and Ethan smiled through his tears. Yeah, sweetheart. I think we did. Sarah began pacing the small room, clearly struggling with internal conflict. She told Ethan she needed to ask him something and needed him to be honest. How much money had he spent on them? She needed to know because someday, somehow, she was going to pay him back. When Ethan protested that it wasn't necessary, Sarah's voice was firm as she insisted she was serious, listing everything he'd covered, including clearing her student loans, which she knew about. Ethan looked uncomfortable and said it didn't matter, but Sarah insisted it mattered to her. She'd never taken charity in her life, and she wouldn't start now, even if it came from someone as kind as him. After a long pause, Ethan revealed the amount, around $400,000, all told. Sarah staggered slightly, grabbing the back of a chair for support, asking how she was supposed to ever repay such an amount. Ethan stood quickly, explaining that she wasn't supposed to repay it. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, and that $400,000 was what he spent on a car he didn't need, on art he didn't look at. It was nothing compared to what she'd given him. When Sarah asked what she could possibly have given him, Ethan explained, purpose. Hope. A reason to wake up in the morning. For 2 years, I've been existing, not living. Helping Emma, watching her get better, seeing her smile. It's brought me back to life. Emma, who had been quietly listening to this adult conversation, spoke up with the clarity that only children possess. She reminded her mother of what Sarah always said when their neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez brought them food and Sarah tried to pay her but she wouldn't let her. Sometimes we help people, and sometimes people help us, and that's how families work, even when they're not really family. Emma looked meaningfully at both adults and added, Ethan is family now, right? Both adults stared at Emma, stunned by her simple logic. In that moment, an 8-year-old girl solved the problem that 2 intelligent adults had been struggling with. Love doesn't keep score. Family doesn't charge interest. Sometimes accepting help is just as important as giving it. Ethan told Emma she was a very smart little girl, and Emma replied that she knew, adding that her mama said she got it from her, but she thought she got some of it from her angels too, looking meaningfully at both of them. Sarah sat down heavily, realizing that she'd been so afraid of being a burden, of taking something she couldn't earn, but Emma was right, wasn't she? They were family now. Ethan said he'd like that, he'd really like that. What happened next was something neither adult expected. Sarah Williams, who had been fighting alone for 8 years, finally allowed herself to lean on someone else. And Ethan Blackwood, who had been drowning in isolation for 2 years, finally found people who needed him not for his money, but for his heart. Sarah crossed the room and, without hesitation, hugged Ethan. He froze for a moment, then hugged her back, the first real human contact he'd had since Lily died. Through tears, Sarah thanked him for saving Emma, for saving them both. Ethan's voice broke as he thanked her for letting him help, for giving his life meaning again. Emma clapped her hands and called for a group hug, insisting that Peanut wanted to be included too. All 3 of them laughed through their tears as Emma pulled them into a 3-way hug with the stuffed elephant. Ethan pulled out his phone to show Sarah and Emma something, architectural plans and organizational charts. He explained that he was starting a foundation, the Lily Grace Foundation, to help families like theirs get the medical care their children needed, regardless of their ability to pay. As Sarah studied the plans, asking how many families this could help, Ethan explained it could be hundreds, maybe thousands over time. But he needed help running it, someone who understood what these families were going through, someone who'd lived it. Sarah looked up from the phone with understanding dawning in her eyes, asking if he was offering her a job. Ethan explained he was offering her a partnership, helping turn what happened to Lily and what almost happened to Emma into something that ensures no other family has to beg for help in a hospital waiting room at 2:30 in the morning. Emma excitedly realized her mama could help other kids like her. Sarah stared at the foundation plans, seeing not just a job offer, but a calling. Everything she'd learned from Emma's illness, every insight gained from being a parent fighting for her child's life, could be used to help other families. With her voice filled with emotion, Sarah agreed. When Emma was fully recovered, when she was back in school and healthy, yes, she wanted to help. Ethan smiled genuinely for the first time in 2 years, saying Lily would have loved them both. Emma wished she could have met Lily, then suggested that maybe Peanut could tell her about Lily sometime. As the sun set on Emma's last night in the hospital, 3 lives that had been forever changed by grief, by struggle, and by love began to weave together into something new. Not a replacement for what they'd lost, but an addition to what they'd found. When Emma asked if tomorrow would be goodbye, Ethan replied that family doesn't say goodbye, and Sarah confirmed he would always be welcome in their home. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Williams had begged a stranger to save her daughter's life. Tonight, that stranger had become the most important person in their world, and they had become the anchor that brought him back to the land of the living. As Emma drifted off to sleep, still clutching Peanut, she asked if Ethan would tell her a story about Lily tomorrow because she wanted to know about her angel sister. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion as he promised he would love that very much. As Emma fell asleep, Sarah and Ethan sat quietly, both understanding that their lives had been fundamentally changed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new hopes, new possibilities. But tonight, in a hospital room filled with love, three broken hearts began the process of healing together. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose, not the ones we're born into. Sarah, Emma, and Ethan found each other in the darkest moment and created something beautiful from their pain. If this story is touching your heart the way it's touching mine, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what family means to you, because we're all part of one big human family, taking care of each other when it matters most. 3 months after leaving Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Emma Williams was not just cancer-free, she was thriving. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone dared hope, and her latest scans showed no trace of the disease that had once threatened to take everything from Sarah. Emma ran ahead to their apartment door, turning back to wave excitedly at her mother, who followed behind carrying grocery bags and laughing at her daughter's endless energy. The 8-year-old who had once been too weak to walk was now bursting with life, her curly hair growing back in soft spirals that caught the afternoon sunlight. The apartment they returned to was the same one they'd left 6 months earlier, but everything else had changed. Sarah no longer worked 3 jobs that barely kept them afloat. Instead, she spent her mornings taking online courses in nonprofit management and healthcare administration, preparing for her new role with the Lily Grace Foundation that Ethan had created in his daughter's memory. Inside their modest apartment, fresh flowers brightened the kitchen table, and new books filled shelves that had once held only Emma's schoolwork and Sarah's bills. Photos from their time in Philadelphia sat alongside older family pictures, creating a visual timeline of their transformation from desperation to hope to healing. The apartment felt different because Sarah felt different. The constant weight of financial panic had lifted, replaced by something she'd never experienced before, true security. Not just the security of knowing bills would be paid, but the deeper security of understanding that she and Emma were no longer fighting their battles alone. Across town, Ethan Blackwood's mansion told its own story of transformation. The sterile, museum-like space that had reflected 2 years of grief-stricken isolation now showed signs of life returning. Emma's colorful drawings covered his refrigerator, held in place by magnets shaped like butterflies and rainbows. Photographs of the 3 of them together smiled from side tables and bookshelves throughout rooms that had once echoed with emptiness. Ethan's home office had undergone the most dramatic change. Where corporate acquisition papers and financial reports had once dominated his massive oak desk, now sat foundation paperwork, medical reports on children they were helping, and thank you letters from grateful families. A corkboard on the wall displayed photos of 47 children, each representing a life saved, a family preserved, a future secured through the foundation's intervention. The man who had spent 2 years avoiding human contact now had a calendar filled with foundation board meetings, hospital visits, and Sunday dinners with his chosen family. The Lily Grace Foundation had become more than a memorial to his daughter, it had become his resurrection, pulling him back from the brink of permanent isolation into a life of purpose and connection. That afternoon, as he prepared to visit Sarah and Emma, Ethan paused at his desk to review the latest foundation report. In just 3 months, they had helped 47 families access life-saving treatments for their children. 47 children who might not have survived without intervention. It was a legacy that honored Lily's memory while creating new hope for countless families. Emma's return to school the following day represented more than just resuming normal childhood activities, it symbolized hope fulfilled and dreams restored. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had preserved Emma's desk exactly as she had left it 6 months earlier, and her classmates had spent weeks creating a welcome back banner that stretched across the entire classroom. As Emma stood before her bedroom mirror that evening, trying on her school clothes, she studied her reflection with the thoughtful intensity that her medical journey had given her. Her hair was growing back in soft curls, and color had returned to cheeks that had been pale for so many months. She looked healthy and strong, but more than that, she looked wise beyond her 8 years. Sarah watched her daughter's self-examination with understanding. Emma wasn't just checking her appearance, she was processing her identity as a cancer survivor preparing to rejoin the world of healthy children. It was a transition that required both courage and grace. Over the past months, Emma had been attending weekly counseling sessions with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a child psychologist specially trained in helping young cancer survivors. Through these sessions, Emma had learned that being a survivor was part of her story, not the entire narrative of her life. She could acknowledge her medical journey without being defined by it. That evening, Emma carefully placed her beloved stuffed elephant, Peanut, the gift from Ethan that carried Lily's love, on her dresser. The elephant would guard their home while she was at school, a comforting presence that connected her to both Lily's memory and Ethan's ongoing love. When Ethan arrived that afternoon, his genuine smile replaced the forced expressions that had masked his grief for 2 years. In his hands, he carried a folder containing news that would profoundly impact how all three understood the ripple effects of their shared mission. Emma's enthusiastic greeting, running to embrace Ethan as if 3 days apart had been an eternity, demonstrated how naturally their family bond had formed. Her excitement about returning to school mixed with nervousness in the way that marked healthy childhood transitions. Inside their cozy living room, with the scent of Sarah's homemade cookies filling the air and Emma settled contentedly beside Ethan on the small couch, he opened his folder to reveal a child's drawing that would change their perspective on their work forever. The drawing showed a family holding hands under a rainbow, with "Thank you for saving my life" written in a child's careful handwriting. It had been created by Carlos Martinez, a 7-year-old boy whose heart surgery had been funded by the Lily Grace Foundation just weeks after Emma's recovery. Carlos's artwork bore striking similarities to drawings Emma had created during her treatment, and to pictures that Lily had drawn years earlier during her own medical battles. Different children facing different diagnoses, but united by the same profound gratitude for the gift of continued life. The news that Carlos was now home, healthy, and thriving represented the true power of their foundation's work. But even more significantly, Carlos's mother had contacted them, wanting to volunteer her time to help other families navigate the complex medical and financial challenges she had recently survived. This was the moment when the deeper purpose of the Lily Grace Foundation crystallized. It wasn't merely about providing financial assistance, it was about creating a community of families who understood each other's struggles and could offer support that transcended monetary help. Sunday dinners had evolved into sacred time for their chosen family. Whether cooking in Sarah's compact kitchen or Ethan's spacious dining room, these weekly gatherings provided stability and connection that all three had desperately needed. Tonight, as they prepared a simple meal together, their movements around each other carried the unconscious choreography of people who had become true family. As Emma stirred pasta sauce with careful concentration, she processed her feelings about returning to school with the thoughtfulness that her medical experience had developed in her. Unlike many children who become withdrawn after medical trauma, Emma had emerged more empathetic, more aware of others' pain, and more determined to help whenever possible. She had been keeping a small notebook filled with ideas for helping other hospitalized children. Her suggestions ranged from care packages containing books and games to organized visits from therapy dogs. Her unique perspective as a former patient provided insights that medical professionals and adult advocates often missed. Emma's proposal to create comfort packages for long-term pediatric patients reflected her understanding of what actually helped children feel less frightened during hospital stays. Her ideas weren't theoretical, they came from lived experience of what had brought her genuine comfort during her darkest moments. When Ethan offered Emma a position as junior advisor to the foundation board, her eyes widened with excitement and pride. The 8-year-old who had once been fighting for her life was now being asked to help shape programs that would support other children facing similar battles. As they cleaned dishes together after dinner, Ethan shared with Sarah a realization that marked a profound shift in his healing journey. The following day would mark the second anniversary of Lily's death, but for the first time since losing her, he wasn't dreading the date with paralyzing grief. For 2 years, Lily's death anniversary had been a day Ethan endured in isolation, locked in her preserved bedroom, drowning in memories of loss. This year felt fundamentally different. Instead of being consumed by what he had lost, he found himself focused on what Lily's love had taught him about recognizing and responding to other children in need. Ethan's decision to spend the anniversary with Sarah and Emma, and to bring them to visit Lily's grave, represented a breakthrough that everyone who cared about him had been hoping for. He was ready to share his daughter's memory rather than hoard it, to include others in honoring her life rather than mourning alone. His desire to introduce Emma to Lily, even through a graveside visit, reflected his understanding that grief could be transformed from something that isolated him into something that connected him more deeply to others. Emma wasn't a replacement for Lily, she was evidence that Lily's love had prepared Ethan to recognize and nurture other children who needed protection. When Emma, with her characteristic direct wisdom, expressed her desire to thank Lily for sharing her father with them, both adults were struck by the profound truth of her observation. Ethan hadn't just helped Sarah and Emma, Lily's memory had guided him toward them, and Lily's love had taught him how to love them. The night before Emma's return to school, their bedtime routine reflected the natural family dynamic that had developed over the past 3 months. Ethan had seamlessly integrated into their evening rituals, providing the consistent male presence and father figure that Emma had never experienced but had always needed. As Ethan closed the bedtime storybook, Emma processed her feelings about returning to school with the thoughtfulness that her medical experience had developed in her. She acknowledged her nervousness while expressing confidence that she could handle whatever challenges arose. Emma's insight that she was not the same Emma who left school 6 months ago demonstrated remarkable self-awareness for an 8-year-old. Her medical journey had transformed her from an ordinary child into someone who understood that surviving difficult experiences created strength rather than weakness. Her understanding that being scared doesn't mean something bad will happen, it just means I care about what's happening, reflected wisdom that many adults never develop. Emma had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite feeling afraid. As Emma hugged both Sarah and Ethan goodnight, their natural affection demonstrated how completely they had become a family unit. Her invitation for both of them to attend her upcoming school presentation about the foundation showed her pride in their shared work and her comfort in publicly acknowledging their relationship. Standing together in the hallway after tucking Emma into bed, Sarah and Ethan marveled at how naturally their family routine had developed. 6 months earlier, Sarah had been a single mother fighting the battle of her life while Ethan had been a reclusive billionaire drowning in grief. Emma had been a dying child with an uncertain future. Now they were a family bound not by blood but by choice, by shared trauma transformed into shared purpose, by the understanding that healing happens best in community rather than isolation. As they reviewed foundation paperwork together on Sarah's small couch, planning the week's activities and discussing the families they would help, their easy collaboration reflected months of working together toward common goals. Ethan's offer for Sarah to become director of the Emma Williams Family Support Center represented his recognition of her unique qualifications and his trust in her capabilities. More than that, it represented his commitment to ensuring their partnership would continue shaping the foundation's work for years to come. Sarah's initial surprise at the scope of responsibility quickly gave way to understanding that she had been handling enormous responsibilities her entire life. The difference now was that she wouldn't have to handle them alone, she had partners who shared her commitment to helping families in crisis. As they sat together planning their future, Emma's education, the foundation's growth, the families they would help, Sarah recognized that the greatest miracle wasn't Emma's medical recovery. The greatest miracle was the family they had built from the wreckage of their separate struggles, the love they had created from loss, and the purpose they had discovered in service to others. From a desperate plea in a hospital waiting room to a family built on love and purpose, Sometimes our darkest moments lead us to exactly where we need to be. If this story of healing and hope is touching your heart, make sure you're subscribed because stories like this remind us that miracles happen every day, usually in the form of people choosing to love and help each other. What does family mean to you? Let us know in the comments below, no matter where in the world you're watching from. 6 months later, construction crews put the finishing touches on a building that would change countless lives. The Emma Williams Family Support Center stood as a testament to what happens when personal tragedy transforms into universal hope, when individual healing becomes community transformation. The center's architecture reflected everything Sarah, Emma, and Ethan had learned about what families truly needed during medical crises. Comfortable family suites replaced uncomfortable hospital chair vigils. A teaching kitchen allowed parents to prepare familiar meals for homesick children. The healing garden Emma had envisioned bloomed with flowers chosen specifically for their ability to thrive in all seasons, symbolizing resilience and renewal. Inside the center's lobby, a wall displayed photos of the 137 children whose lives had been saved through the foundation's intervention in just 9 months of operation. Each photograph told a story of a family that had faced the unthinkable and found hope through the kindness of strangers who had once been strangers themselves. At Roosevelt Elementary School, 8-year-old Emma Williams stood before a packed auditorium, her voice clear and strong as she shared her story with the community that had supported her family through their darkest hours. Her presentation about the Lily Grace Foundation had drawn not just parents and students, but local business leaders, hospital administrators, and families whose children were currently fighting their own medical battles. Emma spoke with the poise of someone who had faced death and chosen life, who had experienced fear and discovered courage, who had received help and committed to helping others. In her hands, she held Peanut, the stuffed elephant that connected her to Lily's memory and Ethan's love. She told her audience about the night her mother had begged a stranger for help, about the mysterious man who had answered that plea, about the family they had built from shared trauma and mutual healing. But more than telling her own story, Emma challenged her listeners to recognize the power they possessed to change lives through simple acts of kindness. In the audience, Sarah and Ethan sat together, tears of pride streaming down their faces as they watched Emma transform her experience into inspiration for others. She was no longer just a survivor, she had become an advocate, a teacher, a living example of how healing could extend far beyond the individual to touch entire communities. Emma's presentation that day sparked something remarkable in her community. Local businesses began establishing their own family medical assistance funds. The school district created support programs for families dealing with childhood illness. Churches, community centers, and volunteer organizations developed networks to provide practical help, meal delivery, transportation, childcare, for families in crisis. The story of the billionaire who heard a mother's desperate plea had spread far beyond Philadelphia. News outlets picked up the story, not focusing on the money involved, but on the transformation that occurred when grief became purpose, when isolation became connection, when one family's healing created pathways for countless others to find hope. Letters arrived daily at the foundation from families across the country, sharing their own stories of medical challenges and community support. Some sought financial assistance, but many simply wanted to express gratitude for the example of what was possible when people chose to care for strangers as if they were family. Other wealthy individuals began establishing similar foundations in their own communities, inspired by Ethan's example of how personal loss could be transformed into public service. Medical centers nationwide began incorporating family support services into their pediatric programs, recognizing that healing involved more than just treating disease. Sarah Williams had evolved from desperate mother to respected advocate, her office at the foundation becoming a beacon of hope for families facing unimaginable challenges. Her days were filled with crisis calls, coordination meetings with medical professionals, and strategic planning sessions with Ethan and the foundation board. But perhaps most significantly, Sarah had become a mentor to other parents thrust into the role of medical advocate for their children. Her support groups for families dealing with pediatric illness provided not just practical guidance, but emotional validation from someone who truly understood the unique challenges they faced. Emma had seamlessly integrated her foundation work with her return to normal childhood activities. After school, she would join Sarah at the foundation office, helping to prepare care packages for hospitalized children, writing encouraging notes to young patients, and offering suggestions for making medical facilities more child-friendly. Her ideas continued to shape foundation programs in ways that surprised and delighted the adult staff. Her proposal for sibling support circles, recognizing that brothers and sisters of sick children also needed attention, led to the creation of programs that addressed the entire family's emotional needs during medical crises. Ethan Blackwood had traveled the farthest distance of all, from a man so consumed by grief that he could barely function, to someone whose life overflowed with purpose and connection. His weekly hospital visits had become legendary among pediatric staff, not because of his wealth, but because of his genuine care for every child he encountered. He had developed personal relationships with dozens of families, following the progress of children through treatment and recovery, celebrating remissions and supporting families through losses. Each relationship honored Lily's memory while creating new bonds that enriched his life immeasurably. The man who had once avoided human contact now found himself surrounded by chosen family, not just Sarah and Emma, but the extended community of families, medical professionals, and volunteers who had been drawn into the foundation's mission. In quiet moments, Ethan would visit Lily's grave with fresh flowers and updates about the foundation's work. He spoke to her about the children they were helping, the families finding hope, the medical advances being funded through their programs. He had learned to include her in his joy rather than only in his sorrow. At the Foundation's first annual fundraising gala, held exactly 1 year after the desperate night in a hospital waiting room, Sarah, Emma, and Ethan stood together on stage before an audience of 800 people whose lives had been transformed by their example. They had raised over $2 million that evening, but the money was just the beginning. They had created a movement of compassion that was spreading from family to family, community to community, heart to heart. They had proved that individual trauma could become collective healing, that personal loss could generate universal hope. Emma, now 9 years old and radiating health and confidence, delivered the evening's final remarks. She spoke about Lily, whom she had never met but considered her angel sister. She spoke about the power of saying yes when someone asks for help. She spoke about the family that forms when strangers choose to love each other through crisis and celebration. But most importantly, Emma challenged every person in that auditorium to recognize their own capacity to be someone's miracle. She reminded them that they didn't need billions of dollars to change a life, they just needed the willingness to see another person's pain and respond with whatever resources, skills, or love they possessed. The story that began with a desperate mother's plea in a hospital waiting room had become something much larger, a testament to the truth that our greatest challenges often prepare us for our most important purposes. Sarah's fight for Emma's life had prepared her to guide other families through similar battles. Ethan's loss of Lily had taught him to recognize children in need and respond with appropriate action. Emma's journey from dying child to thriving advocate proved that healing extends far beyond physical recovery to encompass emotional growth, spiritual development, and the commitment to ensure that others received the help they needed to survive and thrive. The Lily Grace Foundation and the Emma Williams Family Support Center continued expanding their reach, but their true success couldn't be measured in dollars donated or families helped. Their success lay in proving that love multiplies when shared, that healing happens best in community, and that the most broken hearts often become the most effective healers. 3 lives that had been shattered by loss and illness had been rebuilt through connection and service. They had learned that family isn't always about blood relations, sometimes it's about the people who choose to stand with you in your darkest hours and celebrate with you in your brightest moments. And perhaps most importantly, they had discovered that miracles aren't supernatural events that happen to special people. Miracles are the everyday occurrences of human beings choosing compassion over indifference, connection over isolation, hope over despair. In the end, the billionaire who heard a poor single mother beg, "Please save my daughter," learned that saving Emma Williams had actually saved himself. And the mother who had been willing to do anything for her child discovered that accepting help had enabled her to help countless others. Their story continues every day, in every family that receives unexpected assistance, in every stranger who chooses kindness over convenience, in every person who believes that love is stronger than fear and that healing is always possible. Because sometimes, the most beautiful thing that can happen in a hospital waiting room at 2:30 in the morning isn't just the saving of one child's life, it's the beginning of a movement that saves countless others. The Lily Grace Foundation has helped over 500 families. Emma Williams is now 12 years old and cancer-free. Sarah Williams serves as executive director of 3 family support centers. Ethan Blackwood has found that the greatest wealth is the love we share with others. And that is how 3 strangers became family, how individual trauma became collective healing, and how one moment of desperate love became a lifetime of purposeful service. The ripples of their compassion continue spreading, touching lives they may never meet, creating hope in places they may never see. This is what happens when we choose to answer the call for help. This is what happens when we transform our pain into purpose. This is what happens when we remember that we are all connected, all responsible for each other, all capable of being someone's miracle. Every single day, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting in a hospital waiting room at 2:30 in the morning, just like Sarah was. Maybe they're watching this video right now. If this story has reminded you that miracles happen through ordinary people making extraordinary choices, please subscribe and share this video. Because you never know whose life might be changed by hearing this story at exactly the moment they need to remember that help is possible, healing is real, and hope is always worth fighting for. Thank you for being part of this community that believes in the power of human kindness.